Why is Telstra offering free cable speed boosts?
And why was the Battle of Winterfell so hard to actually see on Foxtel? Vertical Hold is proudly sponsored by Netcom, taking Australian technology to the global market. Welcome to Vertical Hold, behind the tech news, where we talk to Australia's leading technology journalists to get the stories behind the news of the week. I'm Adam Turner, and I've finally got the NBN at my house. It's only taken 10 years. Of course, I'm joined, as always, by the non-NBN having Alex Kidman, who's still waiting for the broadband fairy to pay him a visit. But of course, this is the man who bet good money back in season 1 that Ned Stark would win Big Brother Westeros. Alex, how do you think that bet's going to pan out? Is it too late for Ned to make a comeback?
Look, I've been helping my good friend George out. We all know he's a bit behind on the scripts. All I'll say is Ned Stark, a whole load of exploding sharks, and the finale. And I've probably said too much.
Nice. So he's still a long shot.
I'm making my money back on that one, for sure.
We're also joined by Ned Stark's long-lost half-brother-in-law, twice removed, Picker AU editor Lee Stark. Lee, welcome back to the show. Are you staking your own claim on the Iron Throne?
I have no idea what anyone is talking about. My wife watches that show. I'm already a Stark, so I'm probably going to die. That's all I know.
That's basically what it comes down to, yeah. So this week we're looking into why Telstra suddenly cares about the speeds of 500,000 Telstra cable customers, even though we're getting so close to the NBN rollout, and also who's to blame for this week's overly murky episode of Game of Thrones and what you can do to actually make it more watchable on your tablet or TV. But first, it's time to check out this week's tech news. Alex, what's happening in tech?
Facebook has unveiled its vision for the future of Facebook. And as previously promised, it's shifting more towards private communications rather than a public news feed. That's right, if you're already annoyed that Facebook doesn't show you a chronological feed, you're not likely to be happy with Facebook in the future. Although the service is also rolling out a dating platform that lets you name a secret crush. And if your secret crush also names you as a secret crush, Facebook will let you know so that romance, or possibly a restraining order, can ensue.
The US government has stepped up its war of words with Huawei, telling the United Kingdom that it will reconsider sharing information with any ally that uses Huawei equipment in its next-gen telecommunications networks. The US State Department says it sees no distinction between the core of a 5G network and its radio access network, insisting that using gear from Huawei or any other untrustworthy vendor in any part of a 5G network is a risk. The statement comes less than a week after it was reported that British Prime Minister Theresa May had agreed to let Huawei play a role in the rollout of UK's 5G networks.
The ACCC has taken a look at regulatory declarations around mobile voice and SMS services, and it's come to something of a split decision. It's the ACCC's opinion that regulation of mobile termination pricing, basically the enforced pricing mechanism that ensures interoperability between mobile services, should be maintained for mobile calls, but not for SMS. So why does SMS get off scot-free? Well, most phone plans now include unlimited SMS anyway, so the ACCC figures there's just no need to regulate that anymore.
In response to growing privacy concerns, Google has announced that it will introduce an auto-delete feature for location history and activity data. The new privacy option will let users set a data retention window between 3 and 18 months. The move to automatically delete old data comes after an Associated Press investigation last year, which found that disabling Google's location history features did nothing to disable tracking despite Google's claims. It also follows on from a New York Times report last month that law enforcement authorities are using a Google database to track suspects. So, Alex, are you going to nominate a secret crush on Facebook?
Look, I figure that I was in high school a long, long time ago, and that seems to be the kind of period, I guess, where a secret crush might have made sense. Maybe I'm just an old man now. So no, I'm not going to. But it's an interesting move for Facebook to say, oh, look, we're all about privacy on the one hand, but we want to really know who you fancy on the other.
Is it because they want to be Shagbook, but they don't actually want to call themselves Shagbook? Like they want to take on your Tinders and your Grinders or whatever the other ones are, but they don't actually want to admit it.
I think they're a little bit more coy than a Tinder or a Grinder. They're not. It's not exactly your secret hookup, but sort of. And look, I think ultimately it comes down to this privacy balance, and we've seen that in the news piece you were talking about as well with Google, that these companies are starting to feel the heat on the amount of privacy that we don't have on their platforms. So they're starting to try and present themselves in a more consumer appealing way. And I guess with the secret crushes, maybe to a younger audience than me, because very evidently one of Facebook's issues has been that its audience is skewing older. The young people are not getting on the Facebook. Now, Lee, you're a fair bit younger than me. Do you have your 5 secret crushes all lined up?
Oh, yeah, you guys are 2 of them, so they're not so secret anymore. I don't know what you're expecting me to
Nice.
say now.
It's nice to feel loved.
Well, if you select that I'm your secret crush, you might feel more than loved. Sorry. Um, I don't know. The young people thing is really the point here, and they are hemorrhaging young people as far as we know. I mean, maybe it's the problem of when your parents join Facebook, it ceases
Yeah.
to be cool anymore, and so you have to find a different social network. The stuff I'd heard recently was that a lot of kids are migrating to Google Documents as a social networking platform that they can run, for instance, in school and see like a chat history, which is really, really strange to me because there are so many social networks that would fill that gap more. But
But it's
maybe
not blocked at school. That's why.
Exactly. It
'Cause
makes
exactly, yeah.
total
yeah,
perfect sense
Alex
to
and
me.
I have got high school kids. We know they use these things at school, so it's a smart move.
And it looks like you're doing the schoolwork.
Exactly.
I love it. It's an old school hack, really, just using a new product.
I'm just hoping we get a revival of ICQ, frankly, out of all of this. I mean, if there's one
Are you
social network,
sure you're younger than me, Lee?
I still remember my. Oh, I know I'm younger, but that doesn't necessarily mean I was going outside and doing things regular people were supposed to
Getting
do.
any sunlight.
Yeah, exactly. There's a reason why I'm as pale as the characters on Game of Thrones, and it's because of that. Yeah, but when I say pale as the characters of Game of Thrones, I don't know anything about it, so I'm assuming they're the White Walkers. I'm probably that pale. Is that what they're called?
We'll
I
get to
think
that
the
shortly.
lady doth protest too much. I think maybe he knows more than he's letting on.
Speaking of knowing more, actually, Adam, because you mentioned this, do we have reason to trust Google this time when it honestly, truly says that it will let us delete our location history?
It's very hard, as you say. When they said hand on heart, yeah, this feature works, and it turned out it didn't. It's very hard to trust them at all now, and it's just really one of those things where you need to decide either I can live with it or I can't. You want to use their services; they are very useful. You get a lot out of it in return. You just kind of need to come to terms with sometimes they're going to do this stuff to you. If you don't like it, don't use it, but don't use it and then complain because we know this is how they treat people.
And it's hard to actually disengage from a lot of that when you think about
Yeah.
it, because Android, so much of it is reliant on this sort of stuff. And if you turn off, for instance, the location tracking and maps, you have a very strange version of a UBD street directory on your phone that doesn't. I mean, it helps you get to places, but it's not quite as helpful as it would be. And it is hard to trust a company that says, we weren't doing this when in fact they were. And I understand what they're trying to get at with the updates, but you know, security is a big deal. Privacy is a massive deal. To take it so, I guess, almost flippantly the first time, it's a little surprising.
So, Alex, I'm here in the future on the NBN talking to you back on the old school HFC cable from Telstra, looking down on the plebs. There's been a change for the plebs, hasn't there? For those who are still waiting, you can see how my tune's changed. But those who are still waiting to get on the NBN, what have they done for people who are on Telstra cable?
Well, first of all, almighty Adam, I feel like I should thank you for gracing me with your presence. But yeah, look, for years now, Telstra's been charging consumers, and I say consumers, I mean me. I've been
Yeah.
paying Telstra. I've been one of the people paying
And when you
Telstra.
say charging, you mean shafting, but yeah.
A premium fee for what they call a speed boost on if you're on Telstra cable. So this is HFC not on the NBN under Telstra. And of course, here in Australia, we've only had Telstra or Optus offer cable internet services. And you could sign up for a base rate version, and then you could get the speed boost version. And if you had any interest in speed, and as a tech journalist I did, you paid them extra. And they've just announced at kind of the last minute, oh, yeah, that speed boost extra charge, yeah, oh, look, no, we don't need to charge that. And as someone who's a long-term Telstra cable customer, like, thanks for not charging me now, but what about the last 15 years?
Yeah, they waited until the week I left them before they ditched that fee. That was a nice little screw you from them.
Are you saying they actually planned this just around
did.
you
It was
leaving?
all around. It's all about me. It's all about me. But Telstra and Optus both do it, and really, it's not a speed boost. What it is an unthrottle, because the cable, if you don't throttle it, will do about 100 megabits per second. I was getting about 118 on Telstra cable. But if you
So
don't
it's taken
give
the
them,
handbrake off.
yeah, if you don't give them it's not like if you give them the money, they make it faster. It's if you give them the money, they stop slowing it down. Because if you don't give them the money, they deliberately throttle it to 50 megabits per second. And until last year, it was 30 megabits per second. And when cable first came along, it was 512 kilobits, and then it went up to 10 megabits. So they've always had this history of throttling the
512 kilobits
cable.
was magical at the time.
At the time, that was still 10 times
blazing.
faster than dial-up, yeah. But they've always had this history of throttling it and then asking extra to stop choking the crap out of it, basically. And Optus, I had a chat to Optus today. I think this kind of caught them by surprise a little bit. They still have no immediate plans to stop charging their customers an extra $30 to go up from
nice.
50 to 100. Yeah. But Alex, as you say, with the NBN so close, why would they do this now? Does it really matter? It's not like they're trying to win cable customers. You can't, if you ring Telstra now and try to get on Telstra cable and you're not already connected, they will lie to your face and tell you there's no cable in the street. They will do anything they can to not have to do it because they don't want it to be their problem, because it's going to be the NBN's problem. So why do this now?
Well, to be fair, I'm not entirely sure that Telstra would own the HFC anymore to hook you up. They may have a bit of an out there, depending on where you are physically.
Yeah, okay, I can see that. But
that being said, it's pretty clearly largely a customer retention strategy. It's not about getting new folks to sign up to Telstra HFC. It's about folks like myself who are on Telstra HFC, getting them to stay with Telstra, getting them to think, oh yeah, Telstra's affordable, and hey, they gave me that speed boost. That's kind of nice. I'll get used to this extra speed, and there's a bit of a sting in the tail, which we'll get to shortly.
Yeah.
And getting them to stay. And I mean, there's an awful lot of evidence. What I do day to day at Finder, we see an awful lot of evidence that people pay the lazy tax. They stick with the provider for mobile, for telco, for just about any service, out of kind of inertia, out of a certain level of trust in the brand, and that may have some merit for some people, but generally out of inertia, they don't really stop and compare and look at their options. That's sort of what the NBN's meant to be all about, and I think this is a late play from Telstra to say, oh, look, we want to try and make sure that the majority of those customers, when HFC rolls into town, they stick with us.
Yeah. So, Lee, what's the broadband like in your area?
Well, I had the lazy tax, the whole lazy logic for a while, and I stuck with Exetel for way too long, and they were and on ADSL too, and that was disastrous. And in December last year, I actually switched to Telstra cable, so I got to see that 30 to 50 megabit jump that you guys were talking about, and all of a sudden, I get that 100 megabit push that you've just spoken about, Alex. And I'm like, wow, I actually have normal speeds now. This is fantastic. Not normal, but properly good speeds. And all of a sudden, apparently, I just did a look up this week. Apparently, NBN is connected in my street all of a sudden, which has come as a surprise since nobody has told us anything about it. And I was thinking the same thing when Telstra raises, like something must be slightly wrong for them to suddenly give me twice the speed for me not to pay that extra charge. But it just seems pure retention, as you've said. I mean, I'm on the month-to-month plan, so getting off and jumping to a proper NBN provider seems actually like a valid option, given it might save me 30 odd bucks a month. But I'm sitting there questioning: is there going to be any real difference between HFC for Telstra outside of the price and HFC NBN, which is what I'll have on a different provider?
Uploads.
Uploads?
All the uploads.
Sweet uploads.
Sweet uploads.
I'm so looking forward to this. I really am.
I'm a bit unlucky, actually. I've been doing some tests on my line, and we've figured out that I'm getting about 97 down, which is down from 118, but I can live with that. But I'm only getting 27 up when I'm supposed to get 40.
I like
I'd
how
be
you
happy
say,
with 37, but I'm not happy with
I like how you say
27.
So
only.
10 times faster than
Only.
I'm getting,
Yeah,
Adam.
only
My heart
10.
bleeds.
It's like
Only 10.
on cable for Telstra, which granted I'm getting much faster speeds than I was on
Yeah.
Nextel ADSL2, but I'm getting something like 4 up, which I
Yeah.
was
And
happy with because it was faster than 1.
yeah, until not so long ago, that was only 1 or 2. But I'm actually like I've been waiting for, and ever since I got on Telstra Cable, been waiting for the day I could get off to Telstra Cable and move to another provider. So I jumped to Aussie Broadband the very first chance I could get. And like I said, I've had a few technical problems that I don't think are Aussie Broadband's fault, but I've been really impressed with the customer service to help me work through it, not treating me like an idiot. They've put in a fault request with the NBN to see if we can figure out what's going on. So hopefully I can actually get up near that 40. But still, yeah, it's all about, especially for people like us, people who work in tech, people who need to do video conferencing, multimedia, moving big files around, those sweet,
Podcast
sweet
recording.
uploads, podcast recording, for example. Those sweet uploads are just beautiful.
So what's the sting in the tail?
So the sting in the tail is the pricing. Because right now you'll be paying their baseline price for Telstra HFC and getting 100 meg or thereabouts. And it depends on how busy the cable is and it depends on your time of day. I'm getting somewhat lower in the evenings than Adam's getting right now. You said you were getting 90 odd, I think. I get about 80 in the evenings. It's better during the day because it's less congested.
Yeah.
HFC is a shared spectrum. But the issue, of course, is they'd bump you up to 100, but the price that you're paying right now for that 100 Telstra HFC cable will more or less get you an NBN 50 plan, not an NBN 100 plan. You want an NBN 100 plan? Hey, guess what? Telstra would like some speed boost money.
Mm.
So is this like the first hit is free? They're giving you a taste of 100, so when the NBN comes, they're hoping you'll give them even more money.
I think there's an element of that. And to be fair, for a lot of people, they might just go, well, actually, the 50 is fine. And equally, they might have gone, look, the 50 I was getting was fine. So the 50 I will continue to get is fine too. But for some people, and for the heavier users and for the folks who get used to, running multiple high definition streams or maybe a 4K stream or two, depending on how good your cable is, yeah, you're going to feel that when you jump to 50, especially depending on your choice of provider. A lot of what this comes down to, the National Broadband Network itself is a fairly level playing field, but as we've talked about on the show before, it depends on how much CVC your provider is buying. The real thing to look at, the real thing to compare beyond the price you pay are those typical evening speeds. And most of the reputable players are now publishing those. That gives you a much better idea of what you might get. It's not a guarantee, folks, but it gives you an idea of the relative playing field and what they expect to give you. But of course, it's also worth, as Adam has done, checking everything, making sure it all works, complaining when you need to, especially because for most of them, and to give Telstra credit, they do this too, for most of them, if you are not happy with the service early on, that you can fairly gracefully either step down a plan and save some money, or in fact walk away from the plan and go to a different NBN provider with relatively little hassle.
Yeah.
Depends on your contract, but it's generally not too hard to do if you get onto it fairly early.
I learned something interesting today that I didn't know, and came from someone at Telstra, so I'm assuming it's correct. They don't actually sell 100 meg NBN plans anymore because they were getting in trouble for putting people on 100 meg plans that they then couldn't deliver on. So what they do now is they sell 50 meg plans, and then if they do a test and decide that you can get faster than that, you can choose to pay $30 to step up to a 100 meg plan, but you can't actually sign up and buy from the offset a 100 meg plan, which I thought was crazy at first until they explained to me the logic behind it. I'm like, that actually makes a lot of sense.
Effectively, it's the cable speed boost in action. It's just across most of their plans. Obviously, unfortunately, if you're sitting on satellite or fixed wireless, all this talk of NBN 100 probably has you foaming at the gills because you can't even come near that.
Yeah.
So, Adam, we're in Game of Thrones season, and people are really, really keen to see the latest episode. But this week we hit a huge, wall, really. But it wasn't a wall of fire or ice. It was a wall of, I cannot see a darn thing.
It was murky. The night is supposedly dark and full of terrors, but I couldn't see many of them. There's been a lot of stories about this week, and some have been, we'll say, better informed than others. but it basically comes down to the fact that the show, people have been complaining for a while that parts of the show are shot at night in very dark scenes. This week was an 80-minute epic battle, all shot in the dark at night by movie makers who want to go authentic. So it's all legitimate, like candles and stuff and firelight, because they want to make it look amazing.
That's great.
Which is fantastic for them. And I'm sure in their little production studios, when they watch it afterwards, it looked breathtaking. Unfortunately, if you were watching at home, for most people, it looked crap. It wasn't just in Australia, but like in Australia, you could watch it in Foxtel, on Foxtel on like the IQ4 set-top box or IQ3 set-top box. Or you might have something like Foxtel now, so you're watching it streaming over the internet through a set-top box or a PlayStation 4 or something. But even people who are watching it in other countries were also complaining that the picture was really bad. But it wasn't just that it was dark. It was that there was particularly because there was a lot of fast-moving action and everything just turned into mud. You could not see what was going on when there were people rushing in. There were dragons fighting in the air and you couldn't tell which dragon was which and who was alive and who wasn't.
Spoiler alert. Apologies to people who haven't actually watched the episode yet.
I don't think it's
Sorry,
too
I haven't
much
watched
of
the episode yet, guys.
I don't think it's too much of a spoiler to know that the dragons getting it on. But yeah, it was a real mess. And the thing that has frustrated me the most is that HBO has basically come out and said, "Oh, it's your fault. You've got terrible internet, or you've got a terrible TV, or whatever." And that
You're
just
watching it
doesn't
wrong.
cut. You're watching. Yes, you're watching it wrong. You're holding
dare
it
you
wrong.
have bad technology consumers? It's all your fault.
Yeah, but so I've been thinking about this for the last couple of days, trying to come up with the best analogy for it. And I'll be honest, my wife helped me come up with this analogy, and I thought it was a pretty good one. The best analogy I can come up with is that the makers of Game of Thrones have, we'll say they make ice cream, and they've made this incredible ice cream, this amazing Sunday thing, detailed, beautiful, absolutely gorgeous, right? And then they've whacked it in a paper bag and handed it to the postie and posted it to you, which is
illegal in some parts of America.
Yeah. And then when it arrives, obviously it has melted and it's terrible. And when you complain, they say it's your fault because your fridge is no good or because you put it in the wrong bowl. But the problem is that they're making amazing content that the likes of Foxtel cannot deliver. Their networks just can't handle it. So then when it gets to you, it looks bad. And if you don't have a great TV, it looks even worse. So the the TV show makers actually need to take that into consideration or make the bloody leap like Netflix, start shooting in 4K, and more importantly, start shooting at HDR, which is high dynamic range. So that adds extra detail in the shadows. Then it would have looked fantastic. If this had been streamed on Netflix, it would have looked amazing.
And that's kind of the thing I was going to say. I would have thought more than anything it's an HDR issue because HDR and the compression, compression was always going to play a massive part in this. And there is no streaming dark is generally not going to be a great result.
It's a torture test.
No one's really gotten the right Netflix and Stan are probably closer than anyone else. Maybe the guys at Hulu with their tech, but largely, it's definitely not Foxtel. The resolution. I'm using Foxtel now, so the resolution is, let's just say, not great. It's not fantastic enough. In fact, we started watching a movie a couple weeks ago just to try this out, and we gave up and decided to rent it from iTunes instead. But the streaming of that, it's a dark episode. HDR would have made all the difference, and that's what I don't understand about this. I don't know Foxtel well enough to know whether it normally streams in HDR. My guess is it doesn't, based on what I'm seeing. No. But that would have made such a difference. And I understand HBO's response because when this goes on to Blu-ray, and it'll be a 4K Blu-ray or at least an HDR 1080p, it's going to look absolutely phenomenal on the right TV. However, they should know that almost all of their audience doesn't have that, and at least account for some of that by raising the light or at least grading it properly. Grading is important.
But it's a bit more than that, though, Lee. Just to interject, it's a bit more than that, though. It's not just that most of their audience doesn't have that. Their audience can't get that right away when they're broadcasting.
Yeah. Because the broadcasters can't deliver it.
But the broadcasters can't deliver it, and at the same time, it's not as though this is something where I can pop down the shops and buy the current season of Game of Thrones and watch it that way instead.
Yeah.
I've got to wait some time to do that.
Yeah. So is it as much maybe that HBO or whoever was producing it, I'm presuming it's HBO and another production company, should have been aware of this and shot it accordingly in a way where at
Yes.
least the actual result was graded properly to match everyone else's TVs. Because we,
But it's
So
not,
I have,
yes, not just
well,
the TVs, but also the delivery
yeah,
networks. Foxtel cannot actually deliver the picture quality that they were offering.
HBO Now would have, like the HBO streaming service would have a problem with that as well.
Yeah.
and I believe they did. But look, I have a slightly cynical viewpoint on this as well, and I do want to veer away from spoiler territory too much. But I will say this: there's an early sequence in that episode where there's a sudden moment of extreme brightness, which is snuffed out. And I think if you've seen the episode, you'll
Yeah.
know what I'm talking about.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
And I have this cynical side of my brain that says, actually, you shoot that really dark. You just keep it really, really dark because that way it's much cheaper on the special effects bill.
Yep.
You just don't have to. I don't think it's a spoiler to say there is
Yeah.
a large battle in this
Yeah.
episode. The less of it you can see, the less of it actually has to be there, which is a lot cheaper for extras, for CGI. And I wonder at what level budgetary constraints also kicked in, and they
Not
had to say, well, hang on a minute, we can't spend the entire season budget on just this episode.
Not with Game of Thrones. They've got $1 bazillion. If this was any other thing, I'd maybe believe you. They've got $1 bazillion to throw at this. But if you're looking for what's wrong with the picture quality, look 2 minutes after that scene. And without giving too much away, out of the dark, some baddies rush at the line of Unsullied. And they rush over the top of them. And the whole thing turns to soup. And it's not about resolution. It's not about whether it's in
Compression.
1080 or 720. It's about compression. Resolution is the number of dots on the screen. We're talking about bit rate, which is the amount of information in the picture that tells you what should be on all those dots. And if there's not enough information, then it starts to make some of the dots the same color. So you get clumps of dots that are all the same color, and it can't keep up with what's happening. And that's what happened here. It was that there wasn't enough bandwidth, there wasn't enough bit rate in the picture. And to make it worse, and this is what I'm pretty sure is a big deal, is that Foxtel on the IQ4 is 1080i. And that means
God.
it's interlaced.
Oh,
yes, which
God.
means
I thought we were
when
over
it shows
that.
the pitch, no, we're not. This is the big, I think this is the crux of the problem actually, is that so 80 an interlaced picture means that it shows every second line. So it quickly alternates. So it shows like the third, fifth, and seventh line, and then the second, fourth, and eighth. And it alternates between the two, which is great because you only have to send half as much information. And if it alternates between the two quickly enough, you don't see the problem, except for fast moving action, which is why most sports channels, for example, rather than broadcasting in 1080i, they broadcast in 720p, which is progressive when you send every line at once, because it actually looks sharper. It's not about the resolution, it's about keeping up with the movement on the screen. Now, I've watched this episode a few times this week. The first time I watched it was on the IQ4 and 1080i, and it looked appalling. I thought that I was watching the standard def channel. I then turned around and watched it on Foxtel Now through the PlayStation 4, and the streaming is 1080p, and it looked a hell of a lot better. I then acquired, we'll just say acquired, a 480p version, so a standard def version, and it still looks better than the high def version on the IQ4, the standard def video, because it was progressive, not interlaced. That's how much of a difference it makes. It's not about resolution. Don't listen to people say it's 1080 or 720. It's progressive versus interlaced, and it's the bit rate. Foxtel cannot deliver 1080p. They don't do it. That's the problem. They need to upgrade to that, and they need to have bigger bit rates. But then because HBO compresses it before they even give it to Foxtel, because they know Foxtel can't do it. So the whole chain needs to get together. They need to stop making stuff they can't deliver, or they need to improve the way they deliver stuff rather than just blame us.
Correct me if I was going to say, correct me if I'm wrong. Doesn't Foxtel have a 4K channel for its sports?
Yes.
So why not just use that feed for, like, I don't know, for a show?
But it wouldn't have mattered, because the problem was that the file that they were given. Because I talked to Foxtel about this, and I said, are you squeezing the crap out of your channels? Is that the problem? And they said, no, we use dynamic bitrate. They have their, like, we'll say they've got 100
Are
channels.
they using
and
a
they've got
variable
split.
bitrate system?
Yes.
Oh, God.
We'll say they've got 100 channels, but that works in their favor. We'll say they've got 100 channels. They split it up into transponders and put 10 channels on each, right?
Yeah.
And then each channel can have up to 15 megabits per second when it needs it, when there's a lot going on the screen. 15 megabits is plenty, is heaps. You should be able to see what's going on. So that IQ 1080i channel that I was watching that looked appalling had 15 megabits per second to play with, but the file that HBO gave to Foxtel already had the shit squashed out of it
Mm.
because they knew that they couldn't do it. So if they had given Foxtel a better version of it, it could have looked better. So taking that file and putting it on the 4K channel and giving it even more bandwidth wouldn't have mattered because you can't see detail that's not even there.
So that being said, Adam, um, obviously, yes, there's a problem. There are some things that people can do, and some things I've experimented with this week and I've written about this week,
Yeah.
that can make it more visible. Not necessarily better, and these
Yeah.
are not necessarily steps that will work across everything. And in fact, frankly, some of them will make other programs look like utter trash.
Yeah.
But they can make the action a little bit more, shall we say, apparent to you.
Yeah. Well, I'm fortunate in that I've got an LG OLED. So the question of brightness and detail in the shadows is not a big issue for me, unless of course that detail's not there. But one of the things you might actually want to do is take the brightness down a notch, as silly as that seems, because the problem with the picture was not necessarily that you couldn't see in the dark, it's just what you could see looked terrible. Taking it down a notch so you see less of that murk, less of the banding, less of the problems in the picture might actually work in your favor. Lee, I know you had to play around with it to get it to work at your house. What else did you do to get it to look half decent?
I actually followed Alex's advice because he'd seen it. He was more aware of it than I was, and as I've said before, I'm probably the only stark in the world that doesn't watch it. So when I was setting it up for my wife, I turned the lights down everywhere in the house,
Yeah.
which at least helps you to focus on everything else being as dark as that is, and does it seems to render the picture a little bit better. There's not much you can do outside of that on the feed, really. I mean, get off get off the net and hope the stream doesn't break up.
You can play around with your picture settings. Alex, I saw that you wrote about switching between like standard mode and cinema mode.
Yeah, so look, I mean, and this does depend on the panel you're looking at,
Yeah.
and it depends on, to a certain extent, the image processing that it's going to use as well. And look, we're very much, making the best of a bad situation here. This is not going to make it perfect, but it's certainly worth playing around with things like your picture mode, any image enhancement, and typically you're actually better off switching most of those off for most
Yes.
programs.
Oh, yes.
But it's worth having a bit of a fiddle, especially with some of those darker scenes, because depending on how your TV interprets that kind of motion, you may find that the cinema mode or the sports mode or the vivid mode, in fact,
Ugh.
make those scenes pop just that little bit more.
Yeah.
And the big advantage with that is they're super easy to switch back. You're not
Yes.
breaking anything. If you are going to start fiddling with brightness and contrast, and as Adam said, rather counterintuitively, the best thing to do is turn the brightness down, not up, even though you might think it works that way. But if you are going to start doing that, please do that on a custom setting. If your TV has a user-defined setting or settings, do it on that, because then you can say, right, this is Game of Thrones Season 8, Episode 3 setting, and watch it on that. And then when you go back to watch everything else, if you use those settings, I can almost guarantee you, it will look awful if you do, but that might make it a little more visible for you. And you're only going to spend a minute or two working out, hey, this does make it more visible. As Lee said, go for that kind of cinema feel. Close your curtains and make sure the room's as dark as possible. That helps somewhat. Where possible, also, watching it on a TV is going to help over watching it over on a tablet or a phone. Although if you have to do that, if that is your connection method of choice, again, check if your device, and some do, some don't, has any kind of video enhancement mode. It can't hurt to switch it on, see if it works, and if it doesn't, just switch it off.
And not wanting to be the Stark that ends up getting killed for having a bad suggestion, I genuinely believe that that when this comes out on iTunes on Blu-ray, or like iTunes will be shortly after it's over in 3 weeks, then you'll get a better quality more than likely out of that when it comes. I mean,
It'll be a bit of an improvement. I looked at last year's Season 7 on Blu-ray versus Season 7 on iTunes versus Season 7 on the IQ4 box. And iTunes is a bit better, but if you care about picture quality, wait for the Blu-ray.
Having said that, there is a solution right now to that, although it's an obscure one, and this is only heard secondhand, so I could be wrong. But apparently, you know how a few years ago we had Game of Thrones on iTunes well before the Americans did, before Foxtel stomped on it? Well, apparently in Denmark, iTunes has Game of Thrones on iTunes fairly directly after broadcast.
Nice.
Huh.
The problem being that it is apparently ferociously expensive, because most things in Denmark are.
Okay.
But if you're utterly desperate, and I guess Maybe if you understand Danish, I'm not going to actually say that that Danish iTunes will give you an English language episode. That could be one way to do it. I suppose you could line up the Foxtel Now version, ignore that screen, and have the Danish iTunes version going with its audio muted. That could work if you're really, really desperate.
Go Viking. I love it.
You've given me something to do this weekend.
Well, that just about wraps up another episode of Vertical Hold. And as always, we love getting your feedback on the show. Do you think Telstra's being quite genuine with its HFC speed boost, or is it a cynical ploy just to get its HFC customers to stick around when the NBN comes to town? And is HBO at fault for Game of Thrones, or should we accept the director's vision that we should have no vision at all?
Is another Stark going to die?
He
I
will
don't
if
want
he
to put too many
interrupts
spoilers
again.
out there, people, but remember, Ned Stark on an exploding shark. You heard it here first. Let us know whatever you think via the Facebook Vertical Hold page or via Twitter. Thanks to Lee for joining us on the show once again.
I'm not dead yet, but thanks for having me.
Thanks everyone for listening. It's been a great show, and we're having a big push this year to reach more people. Thanks to everyone who's given us a shout out. Remember, it helps if you jump on iTunes or your podcasting platform of choice. Leave us a review. Help spread the good word. Vertical Hold is proudly sponsored by Netcom, taking Australian technology to the global market.
Just as a heads up, it's a great analogy. If you do want to make ice cream, it's 2 eggs, milk, cream, and sugar. It's not difficult, and that's what the people at Game of Thrones or HBO should have realized. But more to the point,